We came here in 1944 not as conquerors, but as liberators for the people of France who were oppressed and under rule of the Nazi army. We came as France, and we continue to be France.
It's been 70 years since the end of World War II. Some of the soldiers that survived that war are still with us today. For all those years since the war, they've gone about their lives, with most of us never knowing much, if anything, about what these men personally saw or experienced during the war. It's hard to picture these gentle, older men in life and death combat struggles under the severest of physical conditions. But for the former members of the 1st Special Service Force, an elite, highly trained, and highly conditioned group of soldiers, no unit was more successful or effective at terrifying and eliminating the enemy. In 1942, they became the 1st combined Canadian and U.S. fighting unit, and due to their blackened faces for night raids and their heavy kill rate, the Germans referred to them as the Black Devils. Today, the 1st Special Service Force Association, consisting mostly of veterans and family members, organizes trips back to the battlegrounds of Europe, where the Black Devils fought to liberate those people in the name of freedom. For the veterans, the trips are a chance to retrace the steps of their wartime memories and visit the graves of their fallen friends and comrades. Family members will visit where their ancestors fought and perhaps died. Some go in hopes of finding answers to lifelong questions about the events that happened there, that shaped those men for the rest of their lives. The legacy of the Black Devils reaches across generations, and the effects on the world and lives they rescued years ago continues today and into the future. So who were these out-of-the-ordinary men who volunteered for such a dangerous mission? How and why was this unique unit created? We have to go back to the dark days of the beginning of World War II to find out. Great Britain was unprepared when, in 1939, Adolf Hitler launched his Blitzkrieg and began Germany's war on Europe. Most of Great Britain's military leaders were primarily concerned with the possibility of Germany landing on British soil, and were initially focused on a defensive war plan. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, however, declared to the House of Commons on June 4, 1940, "We shall not be content with a defensive war. We should immediately set to work to organize self-contained, thoroughly equipped raiding units." These hand-picked commando units conducting guerrilla warfare would inflict the most damage while requiring less manpower and preoccupy a much greater number of the enemy. This approach proved successful, but as the war grew, greater resources were needed, and the British turned to both Canada and the United States to create a combined commando unit. That unit would become the 1st Special Service Force, later to be known as the Black Devils. A secret mission into German-occupied Norway was planned by the Allies, with the intent to destroy the heavy water electric plants which Germany needed to develop nuclear weapons. Codenamed Project Plow, the winter mission was to be conducted by this yet-to-be-formed North American Commando Unit. The feasibility of such a mission concerned many in the United States War Office. The officer assigned to assess the viability of the project was Lieutenant Colonel Robert T. Frederick. His assessment was scathing. In short, he considered it a suicide mission. However, Churchill's insistence and General Eisenhower's commitment to support the plan meant that preparations were to commence immediately. And ironically, in light of his intimate knowledge of why it wouldn't work, Lieutenant Colonel Frederick was eventually chosen as the right man to command the unit. it was time for Frederick to organize and train the unit that he would name the 1st Special Service Force.
I joined the active army in 1940. I served with the infantry regiment till 1942.
I was with the Hamilton Regiment, and when we went into our advanced training, we were transferred to a place called Valcartier, Quebec, which was in the heart of French Canada.
I joined what was called the Army Air Corps, and I was stationed at Brooksfield, San Antonio. And eventually I completed the basic course of parachute packing.
On the bulletin board appeared this message one day about joining the force and volunteering for the force.
The selection guidance was to recruit tough, young, capable volunteers who were resilient, independent, aggressive, self-reliant, and could undertake hard physical conditions and endure harsh environments, and not only survive, but thrive.
I think about 80% of the people in the regiment put their name down to get out of Valcartier. And unfortunately for them, they didn't make it. There was only 3 of us got out.
June of 1942, I was called into the personnel office at the base. And they said, there is an opening. I can't tell you where or where it's going to be, but they're looking for parachute riggers.
To be blunt, I have signed up to go to war. And it looked or appeared to me that if I stayed with the Midland Regiment, I would never get to war. And here was an opportunity to do what I wanted to do. So I volunteered for this special unit. And boy, I went to war.
In a remote area of Montana, away from the public eye, Colonel Frederick found his training facility. He chose Fort William Henry Harrison near Helena, Montana. Colonel Frederick considered the rocky, mountainous terrain and cold winter climate ideal training conditions for the secret mission to Norway. Once the decision had been made, operations commenced to redesign Fort William Henry Harrison and begin bringing soldiers there for training. Colonel Frederick insisted that Canadian and American soldiers be completely integrated in order to build the cohesiveness needed for this unique unit.
So I got put into one tent. I walked down to it. There was one guy in there. Now, he was from San Jose. But we became good friends. We all went through the training. Well, little did we know what we were getting into.
When I joined the force, I was 18 or 19 years old, something like that. I was more or less not in too bad a shape. Then my whole world changed.
When they came to Helena with the accelerated schedule that they had to follow in order to prepare for their initial mission of jumping into Norway, physical conditioning was one of the key elements of that.
The training was rough and tough and fast.
One of the notable landmarks of Fort Harrison that the force will remember certainly is Muscle Mountain, and I'm not sure the forcemen speak kindly of it.
You run up the one side and down the other, and all the things were put on there. And by the time you got through that, you knew you were into something.
The features that almost each forceman will tell you that contributed highly to their survival was, one, the training, the extensive training they received, and second, but more importantly, was the conditioning. There was nobody they faced as well conditioned as the forcemen were. We're now standing on Marshall Field, the drop zone at Fort Harrison, so their airborne training was conducted right here. They harnessed up one day, they jumped out of some mock-up the next day, and the third day they were going out of the airplane And at the time, and with the acceleration of the training, if you didn't go out the door on your first jump, then you were sent home.
And we started doing mountain climbing and then getting demolitions.
We had to learn unarmed combat. We had to learn skiing.
We didn't blow up the whole of Montana, but we tried. Some things that weren't supposed to be blown up. When we got going in our training and we finished with the jumping and some of the mountain climbing and a few of the other things, just for conditioning, we usually went about 3 25-mile route marches a week.
But in 6 months, we had been viciously trained to do the job.
By the time we had finished our training, it didn't matter whether you're Canadian or American.
Everybody was working together, training together for the mission.
In the midst of all this preparation, however, came unexpected news.
All of a sudden discovered what we're training for was no longer going to be done.
The enemy occupied Norway, and they would take it out on the people if something happened against their war effort.
They figured there'd be too many reprisals if we went in to do what we were going to do. So that didn't happen.
The mission to Norway was indeed scrapped, but the training and conditioning of the 1st Special Service Force would soon be put to use elsewhere in the war, on other equally, if not more, dangerous missions. Despite Colonel Frederick's goal of maintaining a low profile, word soon spread of the special unit training at Fort Harrison, and many of the young women in town were especially eager about the presence of so many new prospects.
Oh, I thought it was a smorgasbord. All these beautiful soldiers.
My mother and dad had a dance band, and I was one that sold the tickets. So he went over to the doorman, and he says, "Does she ever get out to dance?" Sure enough, as I came out the door, here he came. And that was the beginning. He called me the next day.
This gorgeous Canadian soldier came over and asked me to dance. And I said, "No, I can't dance with you. I haven't danced with my partner yet." And so after Arthur came back, he came over and asked permission to dance with me. And when he found out that I worked at the fort, he said, "I love redheads, and I'll meet you at noon at PX." So he called me and we had a date, and that was it.
That was it.
In April of 1943, the 1st Special Service Force was finally called into action. They were a new breed of soldier, Commandos, super trained for the most challenging and dangerous missions. The new brides, of which there were eventually over 200 of them, now faced the frightening possibility of becoming war widows.
Dave came home and said, "We're leaving." And we didn't know anything about the mission, but we knew that it was dangerous, because when before we got married, they weren't supposed to get married. I had to go to the head of the Canadian troops to ask for permission, and he told me that, he said, "You better think this over, because there's only going to be 10% of these guys that come back." And I said, "I'll take my chances," he is.
With the mission to Norway canceled, the Black Devils were eventually sent to engage the Japanese on the island of Kiska in the Aleutian Islands. When the force arrived, however, the enemy had already moved on, so there was no engagement. Soon after that, the Black Devils found themselves bound for Italy to engage in some of the fiercest battles in Europe during World War II. Their skills, conditioning, bravery, and commitment became legendary. Many forcemen who were wounded in battle often rejoined their comrades to continue the fight, in time giving the force the extraordinary casualty rate of 134%. In 2014, veterans of the Black Devils, joined by family, friends, and members of the 1st Special Service Force Association, returned to the mountains, beaches, and villages of Italy and France, where the Black Devils had fought and died. The appreciation, reverence, and connection they have with the forcemen and one another is what brings them on these tours, looking for answers and a chance to reach out to the past. Answers to questions about the men they never knew, or perhaps the men they did know.
But I had my questions. I had things that I was searching for, but everybody has a question, many questions. And the more you come over here, that the people that join these tours, who do find the answers here.
Several of the Black Devils themselves had planned to make the trip, but at the last moment, failing health prevented most from traveling. Only Eugene Gutierrez, president of the association, was able to represent his comrades in Italy. Together, the group would explore battlefields where the forcemen fought costly engagements. A few would visit the grave sites of their grandfathers, uncles, or fathers, some for the first time. Eugene's thoughts will carry him where the rest cannot go. He will recall the battles, the enemy, and the friends that did not make it home. The Black Devils were revered as heroes and liberators, and the celebrations began immediately upon arriving in Italy. The first was a parade through the village of Mignano at the foot of Monte la Difensa, the site of the Black Devils' first legendary battle of World War II. Parades and emotional outpouring from locals would be cheerful experiences for the Force family on this trip. Town after town would open their arms to the 1st Special Service Force Association. Tour organizers John Hart and Gianni Blasi knew, however, that the most significant moments for many of the members were waiting in fields, on beaches, in the cemeteries, and on the mountains.
Dad was 2nd Company, 2nd Regiment. 2nd Regiment was the 1st unit up La Difensa. 1st and 2nd Company were on the mountaintop when the battle engaged, so Dad was one of the first men on top of the mountain.
Monte la Difensa was aptly named. The Germans took advantage of its controlling view of the Liri Valley, and its forbidding cliffs made it a defensive stronghold, protecting the southern approach to Rome from the Allies. Despite weeks of attacks, the Allies had found it impossible to remove the Germans. The training and conditioning of the 1st Special Service Force was about to change that. The battle for the summit of Monte la Difensa stands out as the crucible that proved the character, skill, and bravery of the force beyond question. The fighting was fierce, the conditions brutal, and many soldiers in the force perished there.
On the night of December 1st, they marched through the snow and rain and reached this point by the morning of December 1st.
I think anybody in their right mind welcomed the rain because in the pouring rain, their observation was poor.
They spent the day of December 2nd just staying out of sight of the Germans because the Germans were all up on this high ground.
We were right underneath the Germans. We were all set to go when it got dark.
Air and artillery attacks began around 10 p.m. to pummel the enemy and distract their attention. 64,000 rounds of high explosives, white phosphorus, and smoke shells were used in the heaviest concentration of artillery fire during the entire Italian campaign.
A 4-hour barrage, a creeping barrage up the mountain.
The night of December 2nd, 4 scouts went up and set the ropes.
We had some people who were mountain people and who knew what they were doing. And they went up and laid ropes in. We climbed up those ropes. I had a rifle, ammunition for it, 45 automatic with ammunition for it, a bandolier around for the machine gun, and a jerry can of water. And just about dawn, we went over the top.
At daybreak, the battle started. There's some different reflections of what actually started the battle.
Partway up, the guy in front of me slipped and hit my helmet and knocked it off. And bang, bang, bang down the hill it went. Ed Thomas said that's what started it all, but I don't think so. I don't think so.
There was fog, there was snow, there was rain. Several of the men said you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you.
Because there's nothing but solid rock up there. You couldn't dig a foxhole if you wanted to. They had it all set up, and they had everything set fine for them. They've been up there for a long time. It's just when the mortars started coming in, you know, you never hear the one that gets you. Well, it got my American friend Clyde and I guess it must have hit pretty close in, because some of the guys said I got blown about 15 feet in the air. I came to, I was laying on a stretcher just off the top of the mountain, and it was sort of an indentation. And I was laying in there, and Ed Thomas, he jumped into the little foxhole that the Germans had built, and a couple of guys were in there, and he got sliced in the leg with a bayonet. And I came to a couple of times, but we got taken out of there and taken down to the evac station. Anyway, we got the mountains.
Monte La Difensa was just the beginning of a bloody campaign known as the Winter Line. For the force, there would be more mountains, more fighting, and more casualties.
The force went into the mountains on December 3rd of 1943, came out of the mountains on January 17th of 1944. 1,800 men, 3 regiments of 600 each, went into the mountains, and fewer than 500 were taken out of the mountains 6 weeks later.
The loss of life, the tragedy, we've got a feel of what happened up there now, and many of the veterans who have been with us have been up there, and they say a few things, but they don't say a lot.
When you get to the top, just sit in the shade, take your time, look around, and slowly we'll all get up there together.
The members of the association had greatly anticipated this part of the visit and were prepared for the rugged climb to the top of Monte La Difensa. Most would make the more gradual climb on what was referred to as the German side of the mountain, but a small group planned to go up the treacherous attack route to get an even greater insight into what the Black Devils had experienced.
We have our own set of challenges, albeit not as severe as the boys before us.
I need to remember what my grandfather did. You can hear stories, and the stories are very, emotional. But once you actually go and you see the cliffs in front of you, it gives us a little bit of a sense of what they did for us, for our generations and future generations.
I want to earn the right to play my pipes, the men of the 1st Special Service Force and their families. And this is nothing compared to what they did. To you, Dad.
Whether they were paying respect, wanting to connect, or looking for answers, everyone had personal reasons for making the climb.
As soon as I heard we were going to have the opportunity to climb La Difensa, I absolutely knew that was someplace that Evan needed to be. And he needed to be there for a couple of reasons. Evan was born with a condition called agenesis of the corpus callosum. So he hasn't been placed into any one particular syndrome. He has a variety of other anomalies as well at birth. And so that has left Evan, despite the fact that he's 24 years of age, he's developmentally probably around the age of a 9 or 10-month-old. So he requires full care, and he's unable to walk on his own as well. The Germans were defending a Nazi doctrine, and part of that doctrine had no place for Evan. When we visited that museum in Italy and we saw the information on the extermination camps that the Nazis had, one of the, if not the first panel in that museum discussed the Nazis' view on people with special needs and disabilities. Evan wouldn't have had a life under the Third Reich. He was disposable. He meant nothing. His life meant nothing. So to bring him up to Mount La Difensa, to me was very symbolic. Number one, it paid tribute to the men of the force that lost their lives there and the men that survived the battle to drive the Germans off of that mountain. And the force was good at fighting those battles and driving the Germans out of their holes. But that doctrine is something that each one of us needs to fight, and to fight for those who can't fight for themselves, and demonstrate that every person has value, despite what disabilities they might have. So when I brought Evan on the top of Mount La Difensa, that's exactly what I was thinking of. He needed to be there almost more than the rest of us needed to be there to show what's possible with a person with disabilities and to show the Germans how wrong they were.
The legacy of the force could be seen and heard that day on the top of La Difensa. The climb had given loved ones a chance to connect to the lives of those soldiers in a personal way. Some people were beginning to understand and find answers for the first time. The 1st Special Service Force would spend months fighting in the mountains that winter, liberating villages and pushing the Germans further north.
The biggest thing about that was not only the enemy resistance, was the weather. The snow and sleet and rain, all in a 24-hour period, and cold, bitterly cold. I lost a lot of friends up there, but we took the mountain. That's all I can say about it.
We lost many of our very brave soldiers here. American blood and Canadian blood has been spilled. And I hope that we will continue to honor them and to recognize their sacrifice that they made for each one of us here present.
This is our heritage, any way you look at it. As an American, as a Canadian, as an Italian, for those who come from far away, for those of us who live here, this place is sacred.
T431. Nelson, Private, Headquarters. Palmer, Sergeant, 3-1. Perry, Captain, 2-3. Pierce, Major, Headquarters. Phillips, Sergeant, 5-1. Pike, Sergeant, 4-1. Fresno, T511. Price, Private 23.
By that time, the 1st Special Service Force was pretty badly beaten up. There were a lot of killed and wounded. But we had done the job that we'd been asked to do. We had taken a lot of fence on a few other mountains that the enemy had held. Highway 6 and 7 essentially was more or less open to what it had been before the mountain attack. The Allies had elected to make an invasion in the area of Nettuno and Anzio and try and cut off the enemy retreat coming up from Italy towards Rome. It didn't work. The enemy had several regiments up around Florence in Italy, which was north of Rome. They trapped the Allied force on the beachhead, and they couldn't fight their way out. They needed help on the Anzio beachhead. We stayed there for 99 days and we fought the Germans back. 99 days living on the ground is quite an experience.
So we were very thinly spread throughout, yet we carried a big heavy load there. There was more action, I believe, in our quadrant or our area than the other divisions.
Now, mind you, they did some damage. They had a lot of guns there, big guns.
Then they had a big gun that was mounted on railroad, which they would bring it out, use it, and then they would put the big artillery piece back into a cave to protect it from airplane bombings.
And that's where the name Anzio come from.
They would target the farmhouses because they knew that that's where we were taking cover during the day.
And the company headquarters was located in a farmhouse, so they blew it up, knocked us out of it. I have been told I was one of the last people coming out, and I came out in a ball of fire and jumped out the window. That weapon is now in America, fully recovered, fully rebuilt, and it is huge. It's a railway cannon, and it was huge. Gave us a bad time.
With blackened faces, it was their nighttime raids at Anzio that earned the 1st Special Service Force the nickname the Black Devils, given to them by the enemy. In the mountains, it had been primarily their conditioning that led to victory. At Anzio, in the dark, it was their stealth and lethal hand-to-hand killing ability that struck fear in the enemy. It was at Anzio where Colonel Frederick created stickers that said, in German, "The worst is yet to come," and the Black Devils would stick them on the helmets of their slain enemy, to be found the next morning by their comrades. Their tactics and kill rate were so effective that the Germans vastly overestimated their numbers and pulled back their lines, and Hitler ordered that none of the Allied commandos be captured, only killed. After 99 days, it was time for the breakout and final push to liberate Rome. The Anzio breakout began weeks of costly fighting with a stiff German resistance as the Black Devils moved toward Rome. Every village, barn, and intersection was guarded by machine guns and 88mm cannons.
We made our way heading for Rome. We went through several villages which we captured or drove the enemy out of.
When the Allies finally reached Rome on June 4, 1944, the 1st Special Service Force was given the assignment of capturing 7 bridges in the city to prevent their demolition by the withdrawing Germans, making them the first Allied unit to enter the Eternal City.
And my company was given the job of capturing 6 or 7 bridges so to make sure the Germans wouldn't blow them up. When we went to take the bridge, we found that the bridge was a few machine gunners, but we cleaned them out. They were armed, the bridges were armed. But We got there pretty quick and they didn't move them up. They left a few snipers behind, which gave us a bad time. After we captured the bridges, basically the battle for Rome was over. They'd all gone. They'd gone north and left. The reception of the Italian people as we came in was like, welcome home, sort of thing. They had more wine than you could shake a stick at. They must have been saving it for years because all of a sudden it appeared. They treated us very well, and they couldn't feed us very much. They had not very much to feed, but they did give us some wine and lots of hugs and kisses and welcomes and what have you.
With the liberation of Rome came a break in the action for the Black Devils in Italy, and much needed R&R. Just outside Rome, on the shore of Lake Albano, the site of the Pope's summer palace, the Black Devils camped for a short time as they recovered from months of battle and awaited their next assignment.
And this is where we had a little bit of sadness. General Frederick was relieved of the 1st Special Service Force Command and given a bigger and better command.
He was a very well-liked leader.
It was a sad day when we lost General Frederick, because he was one son of a gun of a leader.
He was the most wounded general or officer that we had, I think, in World War II.
He would not ask you to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. It was good to serve under a man like that, let's put it that way. They pulled us back down to southern Italy and back into the training. Train the replacements, more replacements.
At that point, we were the newcomers, but they treated us like equals. They were a great outfit.
Some of us got orders to go and attack a couple of islands. Now the secret was out. This was the preparation of the invasion of southern France.
And then when we made the invasion of southern France, we went on by rubber boat off destroyers. First ones in.
And the Navy weren't very kind. They didn't take us any closer than 1,000 yards to shore, so we had to paddle the rest of the way.
We were very quiet, not to make any noise, for fear the Germans would be alerted. And they were completely caught by surprise.
Within hours of the capture of the Hero Islands by the Black Devils, the main force consisting of the 7th Army Divisions landed on the mainland. The Devils joined them there and found themselves once again under the command of their original leader, Major General Robert Frederick, who at the age of 37 was the youngest divisional commander in Europe. It was the beginning of what became known as the Champagne Campaign.
Champagne Campaign was from Marseille all the way to Menton, including Monte Carlo and Nice and Grasse and all those towns in France.
The tour group began their visit in France on June 6, 2014, the 70th anniversary of the landing at Normandy. Memorials, celebrations, and buried artifacts lay ahead as the escort led the way into the mountains.
Libérer nos patries, privées de leur liberté.
It is with much emotion that we welcome today those who jeopardize their youth coming from so far away to liberate our countries deprived from any basic freedom.
Tucked away in the busy center of the coastal city of Nice was a small garden dedicated to the memory of the 1st Special Service Force. The placement of this familiar marker, as well as many of the others, was due primarily to the efforts of one man.
Another man right here is a legend to many of us, and we're here to meet Raymond, and this is a very special day.
Thank you very much.
History has brought us here. Coming here has made us friends. We wish to continue what the men before us started. This is our duty now to carry on.
Make it quick, because I'm 93.
Okay.
I'm right.
An incident happened in 1944 after you guys. The first
24 was 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
5 o'clock in the afternoon, special forces came through the area, and he's standing in the front yard with his wife, his mother and father, and himself. And an American in a Jeep drove up, and he had boxes of K rations in the back, and he says to Raymond, "Hi, you speak English? Can you talk?" And he says, "Yes, I speak a little," Raymond responded. And he said, "Well, here, take one of these." And he took this box of K rations and threw it on the ground, and it kept his family alive for the next 2 weeks.
3 days later, I enlisted, and I was volunteer to join the American Army.
The American Army.
3 days later.
So the most frustrating emotion that Raymond has had to deal with is gratitude, and he's tried to satisfy that by building these monuments and these plaques throughout this area. These people don't forget. Francois Hollande, the president of France, said yesterday the French will never forget, and believe me, they will never forget.
Thank you.
In my opinion, there is a bond that has been developed with the forcemen. If you're a forceman, you're a forceman. The intangible ropes that hold you together are hard to describe. I can't.
The uniqueness of the force, as I explained before, it was such a close bonding as a unit. We trained together, we fought together. It was a short period of time. 29 months, when you figure it out, is very short in the life of the military.
The training that we did and accomplished together made the backbone of the force.
We were two people from two different countries under one command, and how they got together, and they did a remarkable job. And the fellows just, they felt they didn't have to look who was where. They knew the right and left flank was protected. You didn't worry about that. You just went ahead, and the other fellow did the same thing.
The guy would get injured or wounded, and he had to be rescued, or he had to be saved, or something had to be done with him. You just don't leave him out there. I know of guys that went out and brought them back. You know, they didn't have to, but they did. And I shouldn't say they didn't have to. They had to. That was your buddy. You've got to go and get him.
I can visualize the members that are there that were killed in action, that were close to me. Well, it's a sad moment for me for them to have been taken away, and try to remember them and keep them in my prayers a lot.
That's funny. I'm not normally this way. I don't usually get sentimental. I guess that's the right word. But it is very gut-wrenching to read a name on the stone who you were drinking with yesterday, so to speak.
Alors aujourd'hui, nous sommes réunis ici, comme dans d'autres communes de France, pour commémorer le 78e anniversaire de notre libération du régime nazi. C'est donc avec une immense émotion que nous recevons aujourd'hui les vétérans et les descendants de la First Special Service Force.
We want to thank you for this beautiful plaque that you have made it in our honor of my brothers who fell here in the mountains of Pay, who spilled American and Canadian blood for the freedom of the people. We came here in 1944 not as conquerors, but as liberators for the people of France who were oppressed and under rule of the Nazi army. We came as France, and we continue to be France. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The reception by the people of the town of Pay was indeed a hero's welcome for Cy and Eugene. The affection shown for the two veterans made it clear that the sacrifice of those soldiers 70 years ago was still very dear to the entire town, old and young alike.
I say thank you for liberate Pay. You are an hero and our angel, and thank you so much. It was so emotional for us to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We occupied this house that was the home of the postmaster, and we set up our communications under this floor. This is a very solid foundation, solid roof, so we made sure that we had good protection in case of any shelling in order to protect our communications with the different regiments.
We were getting to the point where we were short of manpower. A lot of us were getting hurt and had been hurt. They took us back to the base camp, and they made the announcement they were going to break us up. And they did.
December 5th, they brought us all back to Villanova Bay, and the force was disbanded.
We were a well-trained unit. We had proven ourselves in battle. We knew we could do what we had to do, but they had no place for a small unit because they're talking about the Battle of a Bulge now and things like that. They wanted manpower. They wanted a lot of manpower. And little units weren't not much value. They assembled a unit on the plains, and they announced the force was going to be disbanded. They folded up the flags. The flags were out in display, of course. The order was given for the Canadians to form up on the Colonel, which we did. So now you have the Canadians here, and you have the Americans over here, and here's gaps in the line where the Canadians have been standing. And it literally happened that some of the Americans grabbed the guy when he went to go back to the Canadian Army and said, "Where are you going?" He says, "You don't go over there." He said, "Well, I got it." He said, "I'm Canadian." That's how much they had integrated. One didn't know whether it was American or Canadian. How about that? The Canadians did march off in style, the best they could. Mind you, they hadn't been obeying Canadian orders for a long time. They brought in a bunch of trucks, and they put the Canadians on the trucks, and away we went. And some of the Americans even ran after the trucks trying to, they didn't want to see them go, which I appreciated very much. And that was the end of the 1st Special Service Force.
As the farewells began and the tour came to a close, people felt they were going home with a deeper understanding of what their fathers, uncles, and grandfathers had been through. The Force family had learned much and grown closer. Their travels had given them a better understanding of the price paid by the men of the Force. Family members also knew the ongoing price lasted well beyond the war.
When he first got back, anyway, we went to another dance. My folks were playing for it. And somebody set off some firecrackers, and he fell to the floor. Yeah, he did. He immediately dropped to the floor. Yeah. He was a little embarrassed by it, but it was a reflex that he did automatically.
Those things around us that trigger our memory, whether it's a sound or a smell or to see somebody's name on a headstone, or to be in a particular area on a battlefield that you were at 70 years ago is going to bring memories back to these veterans.
When we go up to these hills and we see what they were up against, what went on in their souls, when we can grasp just a bit by being in those places, we are opening an area of understanding which otherwise we could not have.
Some people had questions about why their fathers were the way they were. Well, coming here has brought them closer to answering those questions that they grew up with.
It's been fascinating and wonderful too to be with other people who are going through their own process, sometimes of grieving, sometimes just of honoring their father, their uncle, their grandfather, and just to see the grandchildren and even the great-grandchildren is incredible.
Now they understand what their fathers went through, and only through that can they better carry the message.
It's not just history, it's also our future, because we need to keep it going. It's what they did for us, we have to carry it on.
If we do not pass this heritage, this knowledge, this awareness of what it takes to establish democracy and to keep it alive, and what democracy does for us in our common day-to-day life, if we do not pass this bulk of wealth of ideas to the new generation, it will be as if all that fighting and all those sacrifices were done for nothing. It is easy to forget them, and we cannot allow that.
Since the days of the Revolution, Congress has awarded gold medals to express the people's appreciation for distinguished achievements. Today, pursuant to House Resolution 324, we will present a gold medal in honor of the 1st Special Service Force. These men represent the finest of the finest. So, today we bestow on them our highest honor. For these men saved the free world, and now are free to savor the triumph and to share their stories for years to come. And we present it here on this day in our capital on behalf of a proud and grateful nation. Thank you.
I'm proud that I was one of the 1st Special Service Force. I'm proud that I have friends who are members of the force, and I'm proud that some of those friends and I went through hell. And I'm proud that we did the job we were given to do.
These men faced incredible fear with incredible determination. And that was only the beginning.